In conversation with Louise Limon and Jacques Herzog, Ela Becker establishes that in contrast to most forms of art, such as painting, sculpture, literature, etc., the inherent functionality of buildings means that architecture is simply the shell for evoking the representations of emotion that are perhaps intrinsic to the greatest paintings and artworks. In this way, architecture must bridge the divide between the aestheticism of sculpture and the superficiality of mere functionalism. For, as Herzog indicates, it is without people that nothing works. With a particular focus on the work of Jacques Herzog and Pierre de Meuron, I will examine the necessity of architecture that is able to tread the line between form and function, creating sculptural structures that become charged by human activity, habitation, and experience. Herzog and Meuron are a Swiss architecture firm that rose to fame in the 1990s with the help of the commission to convert Bankside Power Station in London into Tate Modern. In this conversion, Herzog and Meuron were tasked with employing the bones of a former building, Bankside Power Station, that existed for the original and primary function of energy production into a fluid public space, fit for the exhibition of art and communal cultural activity. This presents a striking juxtaposition in terms of the scale, function, and nature of the space, in particular the vast size of the turbine hall, used formerly to house large-scale electric generators and machinery. Herzog and Meuron's repurposing of this space has established, however, an unprecedented, almost cathedral-esque scale for an art gallery. Measuring 155 metres long and 35 metres tall, the spectator is reduced to infinitesimal proportions, intentionally or otherwise putting each and every one of us in his proper, humbled, unquestioning place. From the lowly human perspective, the scale of the space is contextualised. Entering along a ramp from the west, one is urged into the guts of the building, a sloping gradient making this entrance feel natural and graceful. Viewed from the upper floors of the building, this flow of people is dramatised further, as individual figures are cast into silhouettes in abstract shape, moving in clusters along the ramp. By casting the floor in concrete and in combination with the gentle slope of the ramp, Herzog and Meuron have been able to enable this phenomenon, allowing the force of gravity and the smooth nature of the surface to usher visitors into the otherwise daunting space. Throughout my Viewpoints projects, I have examined the interaction between the human scale and the larger scale of civic space. This motif came through particularly strongly in my exploration of protest within the city, in which I established a focus on public space as a stage for political expression and participation. United by the collective goal of political action, it is through the protest that the city is filled no longer by the usual sporadic activity of a collection of individual daily lives, but rather for a few hours at a time by an organic hive of united political activity. Experienced from a bird's eye viewpoint, as seen through my exploration of the drawings of Joy Gerard and photographs of Andreas Gursky, these vast crowds of people undermine the typical relationship of scale between the human and the built environment, unifying increasingly isolated detached individual lives and satiating the human desire for collective purpose and participation. In the turbine hall, Herzog and Meuron are able to create a similar effect, funneling visitors into the building and thereby filling and giving life to a space not initially intended for human use. My exploration of these ideas has fueled my own work, as I have created a number of paintings exploring the figure placed within the setting of a large-scale civic space such as the turbine hall. In this painting, I examine the interaction of the human with their architectural environment, with a particular focus on how the ambient lighting, as well as the harsher direct sunlight, has been employed to foster a welcoming public space. Through Herzog and Meuron's use of a concrete flooring, soft ambient light falling into the hall from the skylights above is able to bounce off the pale concrete surface and illuminate the space in a warm glow. At the same time, on sunny summer evenings, the sun is able to move around the building so that it penetrates the slim windows on the western facade of the hall, casting narrow beams of sunlight into the space. This evening light floods the hall in warmth, creating an atmosphere of overall physical sensory comfort and well-being, beyond a purely visual experience. This is emphasised by the tactility of the painting's light that hints at a physical, not just visual, warmth. In conversation with academic journal Future Anterior, Jacques Herzog establishes the necessity of this notion in his work. If we want architecture to really exploit its full potential, it should go far beyond the purely visual, optical moments. Herzog argues that architecture is only interesting when you understand it as a holistic discipline that incorporates structure, form, space, surface, smell, and sounds. Hereby, he relates the physical, tangible presence of architecture to the personal and individual human sensory experience. Light plays a vital role in curating this experience, and by employing the Earth's orbit of the Sun, the turbine hall establishes a platform for the ever-changing and yet precisely regular effect of sunlight in illuminating the space. I sought to present a suggestion of the human experience of this space in these precise lighting conditions through the deep, warm tones of burnt umber, yellow ochre, and tallow deep green, establishing a sense of the mellow and comfortable atmosphere created by the building's utilization of natural light. The experience is dramatized further as figures are cast into shadow against the rush of sunlight from the west. Inspired by the twisting, abstracted figures of Bill Jacklin, I try to materialize this sensation of the three-dimensional human form diluted into an abstract silhouetted shape. I created a small model of the western facade of the building in an attempt to illustrate how the architectural construction of the space has allowed the sun to not only penetrate and illuminate the building, but also to cast a projection of its light and warmth onto the floor. Working much in the same way as a projector used to cast a film onto a blank wall, the sun is allowed to play onto the blank concrete of the ramp, reciting its methodical motion as it moves westwards towards the horizon. As such, this concrete entranceway adopts a duality in its function, working practically as a passageway into the building, but also aesthetically and expressively, in offering a surface onto which the sun is able to project its shifting image. The building itself commissions and exhibits, therefore, a sort of astronomical transmission, with the sun cast in thin strips of light into the gallery. Herzog and Meuron hereby tread the line between form and function, creating a space that is visually beautiful and enchanting, as well as practical and functional. The hall, which retained many of the original features, from the unfinished brick walls and exposed steel construction beams to the narrow vertical windows stretching up to the cathedral high ceiling, has become over the years the setting for an array of exhibits that would otherwise have been impossible at such an unprecedented scale. Olafur Eliasson's 2003 The Weather Project employed, for example, a semicircular screen, a ceiling of mirrors, and artificial mist to create the illusion of a sun beaming its golden light throughout the vast turbine hall. The Tate acts, therefore, as a prime example of the repurposing and conversion of a former building rendered futile by a wave of deindustrialization throughout the latter 20th century. This precedent of restoration and refurbishment has become increasingly vital as the focus turns towards negating the environmental impacts of construction and demolition. As Carl Elefante, former president of the American Institute of Architects, established, the greenest building is the one that already exists, and therefore reusing an existing building and upgrading it to be as efficient as possible is almost always the best choice, regardless of building type and climate. Through the Tate Modern, it is clear that Herzog and Meuron have been successful in marrying the necessity for environmental responsibility with the establishment of a public space that encourages human activity and provides the potential for artistic exhibition at a unique and unprecedented scale. To try to gain a better understanding of the necessity of architecture that caters for the human experience, I visited the Herzog and Meuron exhibition at the Royal Academy. I was struck most intensely by a short documentary film created by Ila Becker and Louise Lemon, detailing the rehabilitative experiences of a number of patients at the Architects Rehab Clinic in Basel. The centre, intended as a clinic for the neuro-rehabilitation of patients suffering from paraplegia, was given the direct brief that it should not look or feel like a hospital. As such, the priority of the building remains, as is of vital importance, on ensuring and accommodating the rehabilitation of its patients in as humane a way as possible. Breaking away from the convention of elevators and endless corridors flanked by countless doors leading to examination rooms, the building is centered around a series of internal courtyards, offering a continuous connection to nature and the outside world. Each of the patient's rooms come complete with a veranda overlooking these open spaces, ensuring that one does not become annexed from the rhythmic flow of passing time in everyday life. Likewise, glass spheres in the rooms allow patients with limited mobility to experience changing light and weather conditions and provide special views of the sky overhead. When the intrinsic human ability to bodily movement is compromised, a connection to the wider natural environment becomes increasingly essential to ground patients within the context of passing days, months, and seasons, and the building plays a major role in facilitating this. With a direct focus on the patients of the rehab clinic, Becker and Lemoine's documentary adopts a basis that transcends the merely sculptural form of the building, insisting instead that we turn our attention to the ways in which it forms the experiences of those using the space. It is in this way that the clinic is able to create a stage for human performance, with the building acting as an enabler for the conduction of daily human life. Once again, this interaction between the individual human experience of architecture and the natural world is integral to the buildings of Herzog and Meuron, representing the importance of architecture that takes into consideration its environment. Herzog develops this notion through the example of the football stadium, a building that is inherently charged by shared human emotion. The architecture must do all it can to feed and enable the sense of atmosphere evoked by the passion of a football match, offering the platform to allow people to do things in their own way. Herzog highlights how the ingredients of being close to the pitch, sound and colour, etc., feed into people's performance. The architecture must act as an enabler of this, conducting and encouraging the expression of human emotion. For the 2005 Allianz Arena in Munich, the notion of drawing the crowd towards the centre, inviting them to be an active component of the action, became an integral element of the stadium's design, drawing inspiration from objects such as a lidded bowl or a roll of yarn, which focus around a central point. The stadium works much in the same way, enclosing the pitch and trapping the opposition around a panoramic orchestra of support and emotion. Ultimately, the buildings of Herzog and Meuron are successful in their ability to synthesize form and function, creating spaces that manage to be grand in scale and alluring in aesthetic, while simultaneously retaining a sympathy for the environment in which they are placed and the people which they are meant to serve. The experience of the human takes precedence in their work, with the architecture designed to fall into the background, allowing human emotion and senses to be promoted and heightened. In a stadium, for example, the emphasis is placed not on the architecture itself, but rather on creating an architectural form that stimulates and fosters the emotional and atmospheric experience of the game. The work of Herzog and Meuron, therefore, does not seek to demand an intense emotional response to the physical architectural form, but rather a decidedly more human reaction to the anthropological use of the space. My focus on the human habitation and experience of one's physical environment has therefore been a consistent area of exploration throughout my practical work. It can certainly be a struggle to represent the sensory experience of a three-dimensional space on a limiting 2D plane in the form of a photograph or painting. I found, however, that through the photograph, we are able to adopt the viewpoint of the photographer, experiencing what they experience, feeling what they feel. As such, any photograph offers a unique viewpoint, and a painting does this much in the same way, inviting the viewer to notice what they have noticed and what they have sought to record and represent. Art, as well as architecture, is therefore a vehicle for human experience. It is this that I have sought to establish throughout my wider A-level coursework.